Get to the bottom of what's truly healthy in this crazy, complex world, so you can take back what is rightfully yours. Welcome to the Health Sovereign Podcast. This is your host, Logan Christopher.
Hello and welcome. This is the Health Sovereign Podcast, and on this podcast, we talk about everything that has to do with health. Today's topic is EMFs, electromagnetic frequencies. Joining me is Brandon Amalani, and I know Brandon pretty well. I'll get into a few of the details of that, but Brandon is the owner of Shen and also the U.S. distributor of Blushield, some technology we will be talking about. He also works for me, I guess, at Lost Empire Herbs. And in addition to that, I've consulted with him a little bit on that Blushield website that he's been working on. And in addition to that, we'll be, as I said, talking about Blushield. That's more in part 2 of this interview. In the first one, we're really going to dig deep into the dangers of EMFs. A lot of people have heard this, but have not dove deep into it, like I have started to do, and Brandon certainly has as well, and really kind of understanding what all is going on here. So Brandon, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Logan. Good to be here, man.
Yeah, this should be a fun discussion. Where do you think we should start with this?
Well, I was thinking maybe just kind of outlining what EMF is. Like you mentioned, people have heard about EMF and know about electromagnetic fields, but I don't really think that people really consider how pervasive that is in our environment, especially considering that it does affect cellular biology. And it's a type of pollution in this day and age that we don't really, or some people don't feel. A lot of people do feel it, but it's something that we don't really kind of get a vote on. It's just put out into the atmosphere, or, put into our environment, and it affects everybody in different ways depending on where people are at on that bell curve of, their genetic constitution, resiliency, their immune system, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, it's for the most part, I would say it's out of sight. It's not something we see. I mean, we see visible light, which is part of that EMF spectrum, but most of it is not something we actually notice. So most people don't pay attention to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, should we talk about that range of frequencies, right? So EMFs is this wide, very wide range of everything, includes visible light, UV, cosmic rays, microwave radiation. There's all these different facets. Infrared heat is a part of that. So really, it's a wide range, but usually when the term EMF is used, we're often talking about this like EMF pollution, right? But these kind of negative or parts of the EMF frequencies that have these negative health effects on us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have everything from ionizing radiation, gamma rays on the electromagnetic spectrum, through ultraviolet, visible, infrared, and then down to radio. So there's this electromagnetic spectrum of measurable Hertzian transverse waves that we can, identify through scientific method. And we as humans only really see and experience, well, we can sense, a very limited bandwidth, like you mentioned, light being one of those. Mm-hmm. So I like to make the distinction that there's good EMF, there's naturally occurring native EMF, and then there's non-native EMF, which is these kind of repetitive frequencies that we're seeing primarily in the microwave radiation range. And now that we're seeing 5G in the ultra high frequency bandwidths.
Mm-hmm. So that term non-native EMF is good. So a useful way of thinking about this, right, is how we often think of chemicals, and more people are, I guess, attuned to this area, right? We have chemicals that are naturally found in food and herbs, supplements, all kinds of different stuff that are out there. Then there's also these man-made chemicals, often starting off as natural things, but then we tweak them molecularly, often for patenting reasons, or just producing them off oil, all kinds of different ways. And the human body, or anything living, because these are new, novel chemicals, often there's much bigger problems in the body processing them. So this similar sort of thing could be seen with native and non-native EMF, right?
Right. They're isolated frequency ranges, and they're chaotic. They're not harmonic or coherent with the body's energy. And the body tends to mount an immune response to try and attack them. And we naturally need a wide variety of frequencies. I mean, if you look outside and you see different color spectrums throughout the day as the sunset, sunrise during the middle part of the day, when you go out to nature, you see animals, birds chirping, all these sounds and things that we see in nature can be represented as a frequency range on the electromagnetic spectrum. So we're designed and have evolved to experience those in a variety that moves in a natural way, in a coherent way that's symbiotic. Now, a lot of these isolated frequencies, like you're saying, correlating with isolated nutrients, those are very repetitive, and they don't move in a rhythm that's harmonious with how nature moves, or energy moves in nature. So our body, again, like I said, it really tries to kind of mount an immune response, because ever since AM radio, our bodies have been fighting this stuff, and it really depletes our immune power. I mean, it disrupts cellular communication. It breaks living DNA, which is probably the scariest part, because if you hit a frequency on the body repetitively, it's like hitting a hammer on something. Eventually, it's going to break off pieces of the DNA, which create these micronuclei, which are little fragments of the DNA. And what's interesting about that is it doesn't necessarily kill the DNA, but that DNA micronuclei starts to actually grow itself, but it's mutated, because it's been broken off. So this causes problems with irregular growth patterns in the body. And, that doesn't mention all the other multitude of things that happen in the body, but these frequencies are pervasive. I mean, cell phone towers, Wi-Fi, things in your house, your computer, your wiring in your house produces a lot of this dirty electricity and/or, electromagnetic fields that are not native and that irritate the biology and affect the body at the cellular level.
But Brandon, haven't you heard there's not enough thermal effects from a cell phone to cause any sort of damage?
Yeah, the it doesn't heat you, so it's not bad for you theory. Yeah, that's been fairly debunked, especially about, on that $30 million FDA study that was conducted. It just basically proved without a shadow of a doubt that these do have correlations with cancer and the development of cancer for sure.
Yeah, it's crazy if you look at just the amount of science on this, like thousands and thousands of studies showing that there are negative consequences from various forms of EMF pollution out there, from Wi-Fi to all kinds of different stuff, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's being correlated in certain areas, but then we start getting into how the FCC works, how the FDA works, and we really start realizing that customer demand, people want faster download speeds. They want all of this kind of stuff. So the commerce side of things actually fueling, this technology to be more widespread. But, FCC is still running on regulations that date back to the 70s, and they're well known for not very well enforcing certain aspects of, if they find a research study that kind of proves that this may be harmful, there's no regulatory action that really takes place.
Right. Yeah. And there's some irony in us having this discussion right now. Like, we're connected over the internet. I'm on Wi-Fi right now, not hardwired, something we'll probably touch on a little bit later. And the people listening, likely listening through a cell phone or on the internet, doing the same sort of thing. So there is some irony that we're making use of this amazing technology, and there's very good reasons why this technology has moved in this way. Yet, like so much of our technology, right, we're not recognizing, because oftentimes they're much more subtle, they're much more longer term, the consequences of such.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's also ways to do it correctly. It's just that everything's so compartmentalized. The telecoms communication, or the communication industry, doesn't really talk with the health industry. And one thing we're working on with Blushield is that our algorithm, which is extremely complex in its code, can be piggybacked onto any carrier signal. We particularly use a longitudinal scalar wave, but for many purposes that we'll get into later. But making our own routers, we could use the same microwave signals or the Wi-Fi signals that people are used to, but piggyback coherent energy on the informational carrier wave. So there's ways to do it. It's just a lot of people don't really know how that's done, or that it should be done.
Right. It's complicated science, and there may have not been any nefarious purpose to begin with, but just ignorance of how these things would actually affect us. And now compound that with, as you were saying, the commercialization and how revolving door and whatnot, that we get to where we find ourselves today.
Yeah. And a lot of it just comes as opportunity. Microwave ovens, for example, that was really kind of thought of and discovered in a sense to heat food or cook food with, going back to the Navy. And people on ships would gather around the radar because they'd find that it warmed their body up. They didn't know that they were cooking themselves from the inside out. But what they found is that it heated their body and it stayed warm. So they thought they would hang around this. And then, from that technology spawned microwave ovens, and using microwave frequencies and adjusting the amplitude to where it would actually superheat food. And with 5G, this is another classic example of that type of reincarnation happening again, is where, the 5G, the gigahertz microwave bandwidth was used as weaponry. And then they found that if they dialed it down and did certain modifications to it, that they could use it for a super high frequency information transmissions. So yeah, a lot of these things kind of come in one form, and then they're kind of evolved to another form to be used for communication purposes.
Yeah, I want to backtrack a little bit and talk about the FCC. So actually the previous episode to this, I discussed the tobacco playbook, or the kind of the industry playbook, how they manipulate science and much more than that. And we see that this is a really good case in the telecoms industry, that we have all this stuff going on. And an important thing to understand is that the tobacco playbook has evolved since tobacco lost ultimately, right? So they learn from that. They do all those things and even more. And one of the big things is that it seems that these various industries, because this is done in pharmaceutical industry, this is done here in telecoms, that they get greater inroads toward the government, because when you have that kind of united front, then no one can question it. Like, for a long time, like, I feel it's starting to break. Like, more and more people are recognizing this. Like, the science is so clear. Oh, if you have cell phone in your pocket, there goes your sperm count. And there's massive infertilities rising. And this is not the only reason, but one of many. So for a long time, this EMF stuff was regarded as tinfoil hat type of thing, right? But
sure.
I feel that's starting to break. And it's, once again, it's understanding this tobacco playbook, understanding that the FCC is a captured agency, right? So there's all these roads that allow them to continue pushing this thing for the purpose of making more profit off of it.
Yeah, I mean, captured is a good word, because, you know, the Federal Communications Commission, or the FCC, you know, you expect them to regulate these things, and so people assume that they're just automatically regulating and have codes, and, you know, that without just common people like you and I, we wouldn't really kind of go in and look at how they go about that, how they operate, how they go about these things to regulate. But when you talk about a captured agency, I mean, that's really kind of looking at, you know, how the FCC lobbies to basically get laws passed in their favor so they can keep the whole show going and keep things rolling forward.
Lobbies the FCC.
Yeah, a little dyslexic on that one, but yes, that's correct. So these interest groups end up contributing a lot of money, and you know, they can get, you know, congressmen, senators, whoever, to kind of really enable things for them on a kind of political level. So actually, one of the biggest telecommunications act back in '96, that was like one of the most lobbied bills in history, from what I understand. It's pretty crazy.
Yes, just seeing that the industries themselves often write legislation, and because they're able to bribe, whether that's like direct cash payments, or they have a whole bunch of roundabout ways of doing this, contributing to politicians, able to get past these laws in Congress and other all kinds of connections that they have. It's really crazy. This is the kind of next level of marketing. Like, yeah, you can spread your message out there, but if you can get past legislation that makes it so you can make a lot more money and kind of keep out competitors, and even like control the science along with it, it's impressive. It sucks, but it's impressive.
Yeah, and one egregious aspect of the Telecommunications Act, and not a lot of people know this one either, is that local governments have zero power to deny or regulate the placement of any of these wireless towers based on environmental, health concerns, or anything. So that was written into law based on this act, which is crazy, because you see some people, they have these things in their backyard, and some people start getting these weird, you know, physical ailments over time, just having this tower less than a mile away from where they actually live and sleep. So it's a very serious thing that needs to be considered.
Yeah. So you mentioned a little bit how these EMFs can damage DNA. We made a joke about it. It's not the thermal effect that's causing this, but there's much more. The best kind of theory and evidence I've seen is Dr. Martin Pohl, who talked about how these interact with the voltage-gated calcium channels. I know there's a couple other theories out there, but can you describe in a little more detail, like, how is this thing we can't see, this frequency, going in and disrupting our body?
Sure. Well, our body, on a very physical level only, we're electromagnetic water machines. So our cells carry a charge. All the processes in our body, hormones, neurotransmitters, all of these things rely on a specific level of voltage. So in healthy humans, we see, you know, a very specific voltage range that's considered healthy, around 70 to 90 millivolt. So when people start getting into chronic disease, degenerative disease, or just compromised immune function, they're going to hover in the 15 to 30 range, which is considered really low. So the cellular biology is negatively impacted on various levels, one of them being, as you're mentioning, the voltage gated calcium channels. So these are calcium channels, obviously regulated by electricity. That's why they're called voltage gated, and they are responsible for releasing specific amounts of calcium to affect things like neurotransmitters and a whole host of physiochemical responses in the body. And what happens is that when you're exposed to RF or radio frequencies, it's been shown over and over that your body releases 100 times the amount of calcium than it normally would. So that has downstream physiological effects that lead to really serious chronic diseases. But the immediate effects look like anxiety, depression, compulsive disorders. We're already kind of having certain responses to the dopamine reward system thing that we get with modern technology, as far as like the apps and the software and how we interface with technology. But there's a very real neurotransmitter effect just by being exposed to the energy alone, let alone, actually participating in how many likes did I get, or how much this, or always looking at the phone and checking if there's a new email, So there's a lot of them, but on the particular voltage gated calcium channels, there's many studies that show causality directly correlated with microwave radiation exposure.
Mm-hmm. And inflammation would be one of those downstream effects, right?
Oh, of course. Yeah. Inflammation, white blood cell response. So we've seen in animal studies in particular that the white blood cell response is extremely high. Like the body's producing a lot more white blood cells in response to being around powerful sources of electromagnetic radiation. And when you're out in nature in the backcountry, or you're protecting yourself with technology that actually works, what happens is the white blood cells normalize, they come into normal ranges, and inflammation markers recede. And also the free radical end products that you see in urine and those type of testing, those also come down. But there's just so much out there. And I know people get overwhelmed with information and trying to figure out what data is real. There's one guy in particular that's become pretty well known. His name is Dr. Carlo. You can check this stuff out you can check out a lot of his studies at health/concerns.org. And he was commissioned by the mobile industry to conduct research on his products. And he had a study that involved 200 research doctors, and I think it was like 15 epidemiological researchers. And this was between, I think, in the early 90s, I think it was 93 to 99. So they spent like $28 million, and they were researching this stuff for a few years and found that, especially in children, there's an increased risk concerning tumors and genetic damage. So he was really kind of outspoken because a lot of his information was heavily suppressed by the telecommunications industry back when they were just trying to figure out, how dangerous is this actually? A lot of that stuff was pretty suppressed, not uncommon. We see this with vaccines and other things, but yeah, there's a lot of good information, good research that people, I think, need to really do their due diligence research on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the scientist finds information that is not in alignment with the industry wants. They have a whole bunch of tactics in which to target and discredit such people. That is part of many of the different plays in that playbook. So a couple things I just want to pinpoint on. So our whole kind of Western medicine viewpoint has been focused on the chemical aspect of us. And yeah, that's important. Like there's hormones, the neurotransmitters, all the different things in there, but equally as much, we are electromagnetic beings. So that is an important thing to recognize. And so if these EMFs are causing inflammation, we understand inflammation is at the root of virtually every disease there is. So you don't need to be like, oh, it specifically causes this thing. Yeah, we see cancer is on the rise. EMF is one of the reasons for that. Autoimmunity is on the rise. EMF is one of the things for that. It's not the only things. And again, with that Western medical paradigm, they try to pinpoint things like, oh, one cause equals one disease. But no, not with chronic illness that we're seeing today, which is the really big thing that we have. It's all on the rise because of many things that go together. So it's not so simple. It's complex, and we are complex living beings. That's really just how things are. So we have to recognize that, but we can really see it in that simple sort of way. So while it may show up as cancer in one person, it'll show up as an autoimmune disease in another person, and a different autoimmunity in another person, by having this kind of background of the EMF pollution that we're in.
Yeah, absolutely. That's well said. I mean, there's so many factors, and I like to remind people that EMF is just part of the environmental aspect. There's other reasons that somebody would be healthy in spite of this EMF pollution that's everywhere. Exercise, breathing properly, all of these kind of things, healthy diet, structured water, all of these things are part of what make a person healthy. So everybody's at different levels of the bell curve and sensitivity. Usually people that are more immunocompromised in some way usually feel the effects of EMF more so than people that are robustly healthy and have just a strong genetic constitution that was passed down from their parents.
Right. So let's discuss that. So the term electromagnetic hypersensitivity or sensitivity, I mean, even the World Health Organization recognizes this as a thing, and they label EMF as a probable carcinogen. It would be higher, but the industry has inroads to that organization as well. So this has been, once again, one of those things, it's a tinfoil hat loony, or in the show, I don't know if you've seen it or our listeners have seen it, but Better Call Saul, which was one of the spin-offs from Breaking Bad, one of the characters had this, and then they show it's fake towards the one of the seasons in there. And I was like, oh man, can't believe they went that way with it. But this idea of the bell curve, right? Could you go into more detail on how that's working and why some people are more sensitive than others?
Yeah, definitely. And it's funny because it depends on what year it is. Actually, like at one point it was a possible human carcinogen. Mm-hmm. And now it's probable. They changed the languaging around it. So we've grown up in an age where, I think you and I are probably the last generation that remembers life before the internet. Back mm-hmm. when we saw pagers were the first thing that came out, and there was actually phones on the street that you can pay for and utilize, and you can't really find those anywhere. Times have just changed so much, and we've kind of gotten to this point where we're just inundated with this stuff. And some people, they grow up closer to high power cables and lines, or they're near cell towers. And some people, because of pollution, because they're not eating well, maybe they just got bad luck at the draw with like parents that didn't take care of themselves. These people will develop kind of like an allergy. And it's very similar to the nutritional concept of eating the same food over and over. The body could probably process something like wheat, which causes a lot of allergic reactions to people. A healthy body with a good inner ecology and a good microbiome can actually digest wheat fine. But, if somebody's eating that every day, for many years of their life, they'll develop kind of an allergy or a response to that gluten. And likewise, if somebody's like really exposed to high levels of EMF and, their body's immune system can't really adjust or adapt to it, then it gives people these symptoms like dizziness, heating in the body, actually a physical feeling of being hot, poor memory. Some people have like similar to what a lot of people experience in detox reactions or detox symptoms, except it's like low grade and it's chronic. So it's happening all the time for them. They're just not feeling at the high level performances they could, with joint pain and inflammation in their body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I also want to remind people have been listening all along. I had the recent interview with Perry Marshall where we discussed how genetics really works and the importance of epigenetics. One of the examples he mentioned in there was that smoking in a grandmother would then, in the granddaughter, even if they had never met the grandmother, have heightened amounts of asthma and other issues. So this similar sort of possibilities exist with the epigenetics around EMFs. And thinking about what you're saying, the internet's relatively new. And I heard someone talking about these problems started to come about when electricity started to come about. So really we've been just increasing our usage of technology that may have negative health consequences for a long time. And that the effects in you right now can have effects down the line that actually exacerbate things, make it worse. So that because we're in this, even though you may never really feel like you're affected, the next generation could possibly be more susceptible because of such things.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's no different than, how herbs interface with the DNA. You take like herbal extracts, you take foods into your body, everything you're doing and exposed to is affecting how your mitochondria and DNA change and modulate themselves effectively. So it's just something that's really scary, especially when you start having this DNA breakage, literal, micronuclei just splitting off and trying to reproduce itself. We already have to deal with telomeres. We already have to deal with, making copies of copies of copies and passing on our genetic material to new cells. And, there's just a really interesting point in time because, like I said, there's a lot of research and it's just amazing that, we haven't really got to the point as a collective society to really question what's going on with these telecommunications and how they may be impacting our health.
Yep. So now that we have scared the crap out of you, and it's really, I don't want people to go in like a spiral of depression, like this is the world, this is what's happening. The good news is there are many things you can do, steps you can move in a positive direction. And now we're going to begin to talk about those. For more information on this subject, you can go to fightemf.com. That's going to take you to the Blushield website. Full disclosure, this is an affiliate link. If you purchase something there, then that will send some money back to me to help support this show in growing. But understand this, I would never promote something that I did not believe in. And this is some technology, which we're going to talk all about coming up here, that is really helpful. And one of many steps, also going to be talking about some solutions that can help, that cost nothing, that you can do for free. So that is what we're going to get into now.
That's all coming up in the next episode, so stay tuned and find out all of the many things, the many possibilities, and why there is hope when we're talking about EMFs.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.